Hey everybody, Austin Meyer coming at you from Mike Brown's hardware playhouse here, otherwise known as X-Force PC. And today we've got the the Epic G1000. What's this thing called? The Ultimate G1000?
The Deluxe G1000 package.
The Deluxe G1000 package, which is $8,000 including the computer and screen and monitor and all that stuff. But of course you don't have to have all that. You probably already have a joystick and a throttle quadrant and a computer and maybe a monitor. Although I love this wraparound monitor. What monitor is this?
It's a 49-inch super ultra wide. There's several companies that make them, Viotech and Samsung.
I just love the curve. The curve like follows the field of view, so it's like the ultimate monitor for a flight sim because the way it's like this wide field of view with the curvature.
As long as you have something to put your instruments on.
Right.
But if you don't, you find it's too
right.
squatty and you
right.
can't get any instruments.
Right, yeah, there's no room for like an instrument panel on here at all. So this is only useful if you have something like the stay level avionics panel that we have here and the Real Sim Gear G1000 suite. I'm looking off screen to see what the exact names are on this stuff. The Real Sim Gear hardware. And what's kind of cool is this is set up almost exactly like my real airplane, like my Lancer Evolution. The Garmin setup is just like what I have in my real airplane. We're flying the Aero Basque Epic LT, which I absolutely love. I love the real Epic LT. It's an amazing airplane, and the simulation of it is awesome too. It's just a great airplane. It's probably my favorite airplane to fly in X-Plane these days. Today, we've got some nice crummy weather. It can make it really hard to see where we're going. And for the additional challenge factor, I'm going to cover the Garmin primary flight display. And what am I covering it with? Well, an iPad. The app running on this iPad is called Xavion. I wrote it, and now let's see what this thing can do. When I first wrote Xavion, I wrote it as like a crazy science project to guide me to the runway after an engine failure. However, over time, I have hugely improved Xavion. Now I have navigation direct to get to airports, visual approaches, full 3D instrument approaches, map overlays with all kinds of weather. To overlay on the map. And as a result, Xavion has gotten to be such a thorough navigation, weather, and backup display that the last time I took an instrument currency check, which we have to take in real airplanes every 6 months to keep flying IFR, I went up to the instructor and I said, before we even start the engine on this thing, I'm going to tell you, I'm not flying this instrument currency check with my Garmin's. I'm flying this with an iPad instead. And nobody says that when they walk into an 850 horsepower turboprop, right? They don't say, now it's time for an instrument currency check. I'm gonna do the whole thing on an iPad, especially if you're sitting in front of a Garmin G900X avionics suite. But the instructor said, well, here's the rules. It's real simple, Sonny. I don't care how you do it. I only care that you do it. And if you fly the instrument approaches on an iPad, that's fine with me as long as you demonstrate that you can fly by the numbers. And that's exactly what I did. And I'm showing this to you today for basically two reasons. One, so the pilots watching can see what Xavion is. They can consider getting it for the real airplane because it'll guide them down to a runway after an engine failure. And two, for people that aren't pilots, if they want to get Xavion and have X-Plane drive it, they can see what it's like when I fly 44X or what a really good conscientious pilot will do to fly the real airplane. Let's go to the settings here. You go to settings and you see you go over to the network tab and then you add a connection to Xavion or FlyQ. That gets X-Plane to drive this thing. And with X-Plane now driving it, it's just going to pretend that X-Plane is the GPS basically on the iPad. Otherwise it uses its own GPS and gyros and stuff like that. Let's go fly and see how the heck this thing works. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look at Xavion's power off emergency recovery capabilities. So here's what's happening. Right now, Xavion is literally running hundreds of simulated power off glides from the aircraft's current location down to every airport and every runway within gliding range. And from all these different simulations that it runs, like a tiny little flight simulator here in Xavion, from all these simulations it runs, it assigns a likelihood of a successful landing to each and every one of the thousands of approaches that it's going through its tiny little brain right now. Whichever one of those approaches has the highest likelihood of a successful landing, which I determine as having a maximum margin for error in all elements of the approach, That's the one it presents to you as hoops that you can fly through. So here we are. Imagine you had an instrument failure in this airplane right now. You're in the clouds, there's thunderstorm, lightning all around you. You have no idea what the heck to do next. But with Xavion, you'll notice it's showing you these little hoops, these little magenta hoops. And you can see the hoops here on the screen as well. And if the engine fails, then you can fly through them at any point. Don't believe me? Let's find out. Boom, engine fail, and I'm hitting the emergency button. Okay, now let's get in the cockpit. Pretty nice view out. When people see this view out the window after an engine failure, it's normally assumed that only an absolute act of heroism is going to save your butt.
Panic.
Yeah, panic. You pretty much assume it's all over. But because you have Xavion, and Xavion has been planning 3D instrument approaches for the entirety of the flight and showing you the best one, you have the path right down to the airport right in front of you. And you'll notice that when I pulled the engine fail just now, I didn't wait until I was like a beam the numbers. I didn't do it like a pre-planned time or location or any of that. I gave my little spiel and I yanked the throttle. Or actually I yanked the mixture for a complete failure. This is not planned and it was not rehearsed. And I've done this in my actual evolution countless times. But in my evolution, I don't actually pull the fuel. I just pull the engine to idle and feather the prop. And with the engine to idle and the prop feathered, it's the same thing as an engine failure. But I don't actually shut down the engine because I want to have a take-back option. All right, Mike, you were asking something about the hoops last time, the colors in the hoops.
What do the colors mean?
Okay, got it. Okay, so an airplane can glide really well if it goes to best glide speed, or really badly if it goes to worst glide speed. Worst glide speed? What's that? That's the frickin' nosedive. That's when you just face plant the airplane, lower the nose steep. And so these hoops have the best glide down here at the bottom. If you're at best glide, you can just barely make scrape along the bottom of the hoops to the airport, or the worst glide, which is just kind of like a nosedive type thing up at the top. That's the green arc. And so, and then it goes from green to red right in the middle. So I'm just going to follow right down the very middle of the hoops here.
That's the perfect place to be is in the middle?
Yeah, we're right where we want to be right now. And so all I'm doing, and if I were to get near the top of the green, I'd be like, uh-oh, got a nosedive on down. Or if I were to get near the bottom of the red, then I would be like, uh-oh, I can barely make it. I better feather the prop and glide as well as I can. You see, maybe raise the landing gear, something like that. But, uh-oh, see, now as I got distracted by you and started talking to you, I got a little bit high. But nevertheless, we're still within the hoops, right? And so I still think we're going to survive this flight. And I say this as a guy that has not actually seen the airport. And to think how cool that is. And when I fly this in my evolution, this happens all the time. I'm sitting there flying and watching the hoops, and I don't see the airport until it's right in front of me. And that actually allows me to fly instrument conditions at night in a single engine propeller airplane that other people wouldn't get. Oh, and I have used this, by the way, in the real airplane. I had a bleed air hose come loose from the engine in flight, and that both depressurized the cabin and caused the engine to start compressor stalling. It was a partial power loss. And I was over some little ranch strip somewhere, but I was within gliding range of a really big metropolitan airport with maintenance facilities and a big runway. And so, you go ahead.
Why are the hoops getting, why are the lines shorter now?
Because as we get closer and closer in, there's less and less margin for error. It's a funnel. We're getting funneled into the runway, you see? And the closer we get, the less altitude margin we can have. And so, yeah, we're getting funneled into the runway. Okay.
Now I can start to see a little scenery.
Yes, and there it is, you see? So we're into the yellow hoops, we're on short final, and so now we're going to get this thing on the ground. So there we go. I just had a conversation with you on camera while following hoops down to a power-off landing in a single-engine airplane in instrument conditions. I mean, that is something that normally would be an emergency that you wouldn't expect to be able to get away with, turned into an absolutely just walk in the park. I'm sitting here flying with one hand on the wrong side of the yoke while having a conversation on camera, pulling off an engine failure landing in instrument conditions. How's that? Now, my touchdown was quite a bit fast there, but if I wasn't busy talking to the camera, I'd have kept the speed under control with a little slip or an S-turn or something like that. So a sharp-eyed pilot, and see, that was a full-up dead stick landing. So a sharp pilot watching this video would be like, hey, you touched down fast, you lowered the gear over your gear speed a little bit. Yeah, well, if I wasn't talking to the camera but flying the airplane, I just sort of S-turned, you see, and lost a little energy. So at any rate, yeah, so when this happened to me for real, in my real airplane, even though the air traffic controller said, oh, go land at the little ranch strip right underneath, I was like, oh, no. I'm not going to this little dirt strip right underneath me. I'm within gliding range of a metropolitan airport, the big, long ride, runway, maintenance facilities, the whole 9 yards, rescue, emergency, ambulance, you name it, it's all there. And I can see I was within gliding range because the Xavion hoops were taking me right down to that airport. So I was able to tell the controller, no, I'm not going to the one that's closest. I'm going to the one that's best. He was just like, what? Because no one else can say that, right? If they're not flying with Xavion, everyone else just takes what's closest, even though it's a crappy choice. So at any rate, that is the power off use of Xavion, and one of the uses that I coded it for. And if you're not bored, we'll show you a few other things you can use it for too. Boom, save point. Okay, so that was a power off approach. Let's look at another cool little feature of Xavion. Look at this. It's wake turbulence. So one time I was flying along an 844 X-ray and an MD-80 jet. I'm going to pause to tell you this story. It's just too good. An MD-80 jet just kind of passed off my right side. I just kind of watched them sail off my side, off the side. I was like, oh, that was cool. That was very pretty. And like 2 minutes passed. And then all of a sudden, there's just this kaboom! I mean, my head came up and hit the cockpit hard, hit the ceiling of the airplane hard, really hard. It was an impact that was so violent that I could hear it. I didn't just feel it, but I heard this kaboom as I just came up and it slammed into the ceiling, slammed down. My neck was hurting for about the next, I'd say 3 or 4 days from a compression from hitting the ceiling of my cockpit. And
did you make a mistake?
No, I mean, no mistake. Well, some people say, you should have told to the controllers. I guarantee you the controller would not have called that out. Because the controller does not say, oh, you're about to pass an a point in space where an airliner passed 2 minutes ago. They like basically never go to the trouble to give you separation for wake turbulence. It was a wake turbulence encounter. And when you read about wake turbulence encounters in magazines, people say like, oh, it flipped the airplane. And whenever you read this, you think, oh, well, I just flip it back. I'm a manly pilot. If it starts to lose control, I'll regain control every time. Okay, fine, but this is like getting punched in the face. Okay, you don't like manage getting punched in the face. It's boom, it's out there and it's hit you, and it's over by the time it's over before you realize what happened. And luckily, I was going slow enough, and my airplane is strong enough that there was no structural damage from it. But it was a hit that left my neck hurting from hitting the ceiling. At that moment, I decided it would be time to have wake turbulence detection. But how do you detect wake turbulence? I've read articles where people put Doppler radar in the nose of airliners. It shouldn't cost more than $5, $6, I don't know, maybe $700,000 for the Doppler. And of course, you need a big nose cone of an airliner that's almost like as big as this room, right, to put the Doppler radar in there. And of course, nobody is going to have the money or the space or the ability to put Doppler radar in their equipment. But is there a better way to figure out where the wake turbulence is of an airplane? Think, you tell me. What's the better way to tell where the wake turbulence of an airplane is?
Well,
if you don't want to blow $1 million.
Where the plane had just flown and then know the speed of the wind, would turbulence follow the wind?
Of course it follows the wind.
Yeah.
Of course it follows the wind.
So you have to know where a plane has been and where the wind
And how do you know where an airplane has been? Look at where it is and remember it.
Oh, yeah.
That's all there is to it. And so in real aviation, we have these things called ADSB receivers for $700. There's one from iLevel, one from Stratus. You can get these cool little ADSB receivers to get the aircraft's location. It's a $700 receiver.
So it tells you the location of aircraft all the time?
Yeah, just like this. And you see them on the map. Here it is. I've got X-Plane sending out the airplanes this time, but X-Plane sends out these airplanes in exactly the same format as an ADSB receiver. I programmed X-Plane to output air traffic and weather and everything else that you see here in exactly the same format as an ADSB receiver. This doesn't even know it's in a simulator. It thinks it's talking to a real airplane because the formats are all the same. It doesn't know the difference. And one of the things that it outputs is traffic. And so all Xavion does is for every airplane in the sky, every 1 second, every airplane lays a little egg. Lays a little egg in the sky. It's a little wake turbulence egg. And then that wake turbulence descends at 500 feet per minute, and it moves with the wind, gradually dissipates over about 3 or 4 minutes. And so let's take a look. Here I am flying along, and you can see this guy. He's at 4,400 feet above me, 4,500 feet above me. You can zoom in tight on this, Mike, so you can really see the screen.
Done.
Okay, so there's this is me here. This guy's at 4,600 feet above me. He's doing 80 knots and 500 feet per minute. It sounds like a Cessna 172 clawing for altitude. And you can see the wake turbulence is yellow, which means it's kind of sort of close, and then it gets orange. Bump, bump, bump. And once it goes red, you really want to watch out for it. And so I'm going to turn around and try and come after this guy. And look, there it is, you see? And so all this is, and it works in the real airplane exactly like this. Xavion watches the airplanes that come in through ADS-B, lets them drop a little wake turbulence egg every 1 second, descends the wake turbulence to 500 feet per minute and moves it with the wind, and the next thing you know where wake turbulence is.
Is there anything in the world that does this?
No,
Xavion?
no. I've never heard of any other app or avionics, including multi-million-dollar or multi-$100,000 displays and Boeings. I've never heard of them doing it. I've never heard of any app in the world doing this. Maybe they do, and I just haven't heard about it. But now, when I fly along, remember, I fly at 28,000 feet in 844 X-ray. The airliners fly at about 32,000 feet. We're not that far apart. And the air traffic controllers are not going to be like, oh, an airliner passed right above where you're about to be 2 minutes ago. They're not going to take the time to do that. And so many times when I've flown, I've seen the wake turbulence coming at me, and I've just told the air traffic control that I'm coming down 2,000 feet per minute, or coming down 2,000 feet to go under it, or going left or going right, or I just slow the airplane down and accept that I might hit it. But if you hit it at a lower speed, it's not nearly as violent, right? You don't have that.
You're telling this based on Xavion?
Absolutely, yes.
And so
constantly.
Do you think they're wondering how the hell does he know?
I'm sure they do, because nobody else knows. Because I'll literally be like, it looks like an airliner is leaving some wake turbulence over this part of my path. I think I need to come down 2,000 feet. And they've got to be like, well, maybe he's looking at the traffic on his Garmin's and just figuring out mentally where the wake turbulence is. That's probably what they suspect. And they're also, I'm sure, thinking, and he's not good enough to do that because nobody can keep track of that in their mind. He's wasting my time. He's an idiot. They don't know I'm literally looking at what they can't see, which is the wake turbulence of the airplane. And I am seeing wake turbulence at a net cost. Well, Xavion is, we looked at the price. It's $10 a month. Yeah, Xavion is $10 a month and an iPad. And I've got information here that beats Doppler rate. Yeah, and that's only one feature of a ton. So at any rate, that's another cool thing, wake turbulence. If you're not bored, we'll cut here, then bring it right back in, and I'll show you something else. Okay, let's look at the next feature. So this is kind of cool. Let's go back to the basics in Xavion here for a minute. Backup synthetic vision. So a thing about synthetic vision is it actually has terrain and airports and stuff like that, so you don't slam into mountains. I read about this in magazines where people slam into mountains, and I'm just like going, God, how can you do that when an iPad with Xavion and other apps as well will draw the darn terrain? But so here we go. We got our synthetic vision, and we have our altitude and vertical speed and airspeed. Now, Mike, do you know how an airplane determines its airspeed? Do you know how it figures out what the airspeed is?
I guess the pitot tube.
Exactly, the pitot tube. And how does the pitot tube work?
Well, that I'm not as...
It measures pressure.
Air shoots into it.
Yes, that's all you need. That's it. Air shoots into it. Bing, you got it. So show me the pitot tube on the iPad. It's inside the cockpit. It can't have a pitot tube. Right? What do you want me to do? Glue a pitot tube to it that's inside the cockpit?
I guess it's using GPS and some sort of algorithm to figure out airspeed.
Exactly. So when I first came out with Xavion, people looked at this airspeed and they kept saying, it's not showing my GPS speed. Why isn't it showing GPS?
Because it's airspeed.
And how does it know the airspeed? And this is where it gets awesome.
Well,
fine, you guess.
It takes the GPS speed and then knows what the wind is.
And how does it know the wind?
Through something.
The ADS-B weather receiver.
Okay.
Right. And then what about air density? The pitot tube looks at the air pressure acting on the airplane. As the air density comes down, the pressure comes down. How can it know the air density sitting inside the cabin of the airplane? Possibly a pressurized airplane. How does it know the air density?
I guess the altitude.
Exactly. And then however high it is, and how does it know the altitude?
Let's see, how does it know the altitude? GPS?
Yes, GPS. Yeah. So in other words, Xavion knows your ground speed from GPS. Then it subtracts out your wind that it got from the ADS-B receiver. Then it's got your true airspeed. Then it looks at the air density based on the altitude which came from GPS, and also the temperature and air and barometric pressure setting from the nearest airport, which it also got from the weather receiver. So it also looks at air temperature and pressure if they're not standard. And when it has all that, It's got the indicated airspeed.
So if that's
the actual pressure on the plane.
Then that number shouldn't match exactly what's in the cockpit of the plane, right?
It should match almost exactly because I'm describing what it, well, let's see if it does. This is 195 knots. Boom, 195 knots on the Garmin.
But it's not
boom shakalaka.
It's not mirroring what it sees on the Garmin.
Oh, hell
it's
no.
Calculating.
Oh, absolutely. It's calculating. When I pulled these apart, this was no parlor trick. This is showing the indicated airspeed from X-plane. This is calculating it based on X-plane's ground speed, X-plane's altitude, X-plane's barometric pressure, and X-plane's air density.
Most people would assume it's just copying.
No, too easy, too easy. And remember, I already told you, X-plane sends out the same data that the real weather receiver sends out, in the same format even. And the weather receiver doesn't have a pitot tube on it. It's sitting there in the cockpit on your dash. Now, why do you think you want to know airspeed instead of ground speed? Because all the other aviation apps just stupidly show GPS ground speed because they're lazy. But why would you rather see airspeed than ground speed? Why do you think?
Airspeed affects the way the plane handles.
Exactly. It controls how the airplane flies. And not only that, but the airspeed is a measure of the pressure on the airplane.
Ground speed is just if you want to see that you're going to get there on time.
Right, exactly. The ground speed's nothing more than am I going to get there in time. The airspeed is, am I going to rip apart my airplane if I lower the landing gear or the flaps? Okay, so here's another story for you. I'm at the beach on vacation, and unbeknownst to me, a little mud dauber crawled into the pitot tube of my airplane and built a little nest inside the pitot tube of my airplane. And here's the annoying thing. I had the thing in the business hangar. It's the most expensive hangar at the airport. I paid like 80 bucks a night or something for the business hangar. And the mud dauber still comes in and builds a nest in my pitot tube. Of all the nerve, doesn't he know he's in the business hangar? For God's sake. But at any rate, the mud dauber, he's got no respect for the rules. And he came in and built his little nest in my pitot tube. Of course, I didn't know. You can't pre-flight that. Hop in the airplane, blast off, and away I go. And I retract the landing gear. And it won't go up. Landing gear won't go up. I'm like, what? How fast am I going as well? Where's my airspeed? Now look at the airspeed, it's at 0. So I'm at a 0 speed, the landing gear won't go up, and I'm climbing out of the pad. Exactly. First of all, the mud dauber clogged the pitot tube, so I had 0 airspeed. Then I go to retract the landing gear, and the airplane's like, oh, no, you didn't. You're not retracting the gear on the ground. And I think you're on the ground because I don't think you're moving. And now what's the name of the game? Fly the airplane without stalling, and don't go over your landing gear speed, right? The landing gear is only allowed to be down up to 150 knots. So I need to not exceed 100 indicated, not ground speed. Nobody gives a rat's ass what the ground speed is.
And then
it's
you
the
start
airspeed.
overthinking how fast am I?
Yeah, exactly. How fast, and I'm overthinking it. But I had Xavion running, so I just stayed below my gear speed and above my stall speed right there on my frickin' iPad.
Just hang a U?
Yeah, hung a Yui. I dropped the flaps down. No problem with flap overspeed. I made sure I was below 160 for the first notch of flaps. I was already below 150 for the gear and below 140 for the second notch of flaps. And I made sure to stay above about 77 knots all the way in. Hook a Yui, brought it in, did an absolutely normal flight. And that's because this shows the estimated indicated airspeed, because that's what determines the pressure on the airplane and therefore the limits, the structural limits you want to put on the plane. So that's a cool thing. Now we're going to stop filming for a sec, and if you're not bored, I'll show you something else. Okay, you're still here. All right, let's do a little quick Xavion weather. All right, so here's a really cool thing. X-plane sends out weather in exactly the same format as an ADS-B receiver does, okay? And so Xavion is getting weather now just like it would in the real airplane. So what you do is you go to plot weather, and this is going to get ADS-B weather from your ADS-B receiver, which in the real airplane would be on the dash. Let's go to NEXRAD. We have like low resolution NEXRAD, high resolution NEXRAD, a lot more resolution. And then you can also do things like freezing level, wind and turbulence, cloud tops. Oh, a cool favorite of mine is VFR and IFR airports. You can see the airports are all kind of yellow here. So we got marginal VFR conditions. Orange and red start to get to IFR and low IFR. Freezing and wind and turbulence can show up as well, although they haven't come in across the wire just quite yet. They take like 5 or 10 minutes to come in. But the NEXRAD is probably the most important one. Oh, and you can see I just flew through the NEXRAD. You see, I'm just coming through some yellow to red activity, and that's where we picked up the hail. So yeah, ADS-B weather is cool in that it gives you wind And the wind right here, it looks like right now the wind is just from 12 knots, temperature 2 degrees C. So you have this full vector suite of winds for the entire nation. And Xavion takes in like a little interpolation between the closest winds to you, and that's what it actually uses. And then for the power off glide calculations that we demoed recently, it looks at the wind at the airport, if it's reported, and the winds aloft where you are. It actually looks at the winds at all the different levels. So you might be flying along in a 40 or 50 knot wind with the wind at 15 knots from a different direction down at the surface. And since Xavion has a full three-dimensional matrix of winds from the ADS-B receiver, which sends winds aloft at what, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21,000 feet, Xavion interpolates between all the different altitudes at all the different reporting stations on the way down, and then even grabs the local, what's called METAR, which is the airport weather report, for that final bit of the approach in. So Xavion has a three-dimensional wind profile that it uses to make the power off approaches more accurate. There we go. And so now what you can see is you can pull up an instrument approach plate for OXC, and all the weather menu stuff is still there. So you can see a weather overlay. And I can tell you from looking at this right now, coming into the airport would be a little bit marginal, but the missed approach would be, let's see, if I come in here, the missed approach is to go this way. Yeah, coming to the airport would be marginal. Missed approach would be basically suicide. So this is something that is really nice to see. You know, I can get in, but I don't know if I can get out. Yeah, so weather overlays over our regular map and our approach plates. And while we're at it, we can always put down, say, a sectional chart, just like ForeFlight and all the other mapping apps. You know, you can get sectional chart with the weather overlay, or let's see, low en route. And so basically, if you already fly with ForeFlight, this is just like what you've already seen a million times. Take your maps, overlay your weather, take your approach plates, overlay your weather. But what is different, of course, is we have those power off hoops and the estimated indicated airspeed. So that's a cool little thing. And I'll show you another cool feature next if you're not bored yet. Okay, now we're motoring along, and now it's time for me to show what I believe is a MacDaddy Xavion feature, which is a 3D instrument approach. Mike just remarked during the break that those hoops sure are tall. Well, yeah, that's because the Epic LT airplane glides so well with that prop feathered and the gear and the flaps up, but it can dive like a rock if you put that prop at redline and push the nose down. So the Epic has such a wide glide range that when you're up at 15,000 feet, the hoops wind up being really tall. This airplane has a wide performance envelope. I mean, it has an incredibly wide performance envelope. So for the Epic LT, they wanted to have a little party for the customers, for the Epic LT private owners to do something fun. And you know how sometimes you go out for hamburgers, you know, with friends, or a night out with friends? For the Epic LT owners, they said, all right, for our fun, we're just going to fly around the world in their Epic LTs. And they flew their single-engine propeller airplanes like this. Whoops, looks like I picked up some ice, and I'm flying with my gear down. Let's fix that. Whoops. Oh, this is cool. I think I picked up ice.
Well, how do you have de-icing?
I can see it. Yes, but I don't know how to turn it on because, cool. All right, we're not going to show that. Go ahead and stop because we're not. I looked at the airplane, the external view. I can see ice on the wings of my airplane. An X-plane actually doesn't normally render ice on the wings. So the Aerobas guys, when they made their Epic, they got it picking up ice in the clouds and they render it. So what Mike is shift 9, yeah. And then in shift 9 in the cockpit, we can go to de-ice boots, prop heat, windshield heat, inertial separator, and pitot and stall warning heat. Okay, so we've just turned on our de-icing system. The question is there enough time to get this thing out before these de-ice?
Instantly de-ice?
Well, the boots will take off ice instantly. Boots go bam, and they knock it off in a piece. The boots will literally, they expand and the ice comes off instantly.
Oh, so it's one of those like
yeah, you can see it. You can see it. And so, yeah, and so we turned on the ice and now we got an airplane again. So anyway, that was kind of cool. That was a completely unplanned icing encounter. And my first instinct was to say, stop the camera, let's do it again. But it's just too fun to throw this footage in the can. Let's make sure this makes it on YouTube because it's just too cool. Now that we almost died, should we try the insert approach again? Okay, and so now finally for the pièce de résistance, the 3D instrument approach. And this is kind of a new feature to Xavion that I absolutely love. So let's say we're just motoring along this guy here. Oh wow, we're up at 27,000 feet, which an Epic LT will do. And as you can see, as we motor along, it's just giving whatever it thinks is the best possible approach at any given moment. It wants to bring me into McIntyre. That's a lot farther than Camden, but it's still well within our gliding distance. As if I had an engine failure, in reality, I'd strongly consider McIntyre rather than Camden just by following the hoops. Because, yeah, well, it's an Air Force base. They're big. They might be a little bit annoyed. Oh, I've actually flown my Evolution to this Air Force base before.
Drove your Ferrari down
That's right. I raced my Ferrari down the runway at full speed. All of this was cleared, by the way, in advance. But, okay, but I really don't do Ferraris anymore. I've switched over to Tesla completely. I just find the Teslas to be so much better. I'm basically completely converted away from Ferraris and over to Teslas. They're just so much better. But anyway, we're motoring along here, and we can see our power off hoops. And now I'm going to finally show you instrument approaches. So let's say we hit nav, and let's say we're going to Charleston. I say K, C, H, S. And now we're going to Charleston at 20,000 feet. Yay, that wasn't hard. Now we want to do an instrument approach. One button press. One. Let's say we want to do the VOR DME 15 to Carno, or VOR DME starting at Carno. Boom. Done. One button press and you got the approach. Now let's go back to our map, and there it is. And so what Xavion does is, because I asked to go to Charleston at 20,000 feet, it put the hoops down at 20,000 feet, and we're at 29,000 feet now. So we got 9,000 feet to lose. Let's go and get the power off and trim her down. And the elevation of these hoops is fascinating. I said I wanted to go to Charleston at 20,000 feet, right? And then I'd hit one button press for the instrument approach. The moment I hit that one button press, it said, boom, here's the altitude. Let me tell you what we're going to do here. It's going to fly at 20,000 feet, intercept a 3-degree glide path, take the 3-degree glide path down such that I wind up at the runway elevation at the runway touchdown, with all the little step down fixes along the way being honored. So it won't go below any of the step down fixes on the way. And it's all done completely automatically. It's just, the moment I hit that one button press, it was all done in like well under 1/10 of a second. With the Garmin, you're saying they're entering the altitudes manually, and if you enter the altitude wrong, well, I think you can kind of guess what happens next. And then not only does it draw, or make all these little hoops in its little brain, but it draws them on the map. And Mike, are you zoomed on the iPad here to see the iPad?
I was earlier when you were looking at this.
All right.
Zooming back in.
All right, well, yeah, go ahead and take a look at the pad here. So we see the hoops from the mid-state of South Carolina down to Charleston. And then notice that for each of these fixes we have to hit, it gives the altitude. Go to Carno, 1,600 feet. Ibane, 1,600 feet. Mira, 1,100 feet. And then Colot, the final touchdown, 93 feet. And so all of the altitudes are shown. So as soon as you hit that one button for the approach, the entire approach is mapped out in 3 dimensions, and you can see it here, complete with little altitude callouts and the awesome, fun little DME arc there that it flies. It's almost impossible to fly without some sort of help. And the hoops are tossed down in 3 dimensions as well. And since we asked to go to Charleston at 20,000 feet, we're currently at 22. I bet you if we level out in the middle of the hoops, we'll be right at 20,000 feet. Because that's the altitude I wanted to go to Charleston. Charleston, dit, 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 dit. And there we go, right in the middle of the hoops at 20,000 feet. So now we're just going to motor on along to Charleston at 20,000, and our instrument approach is already preloaded and ready to go. The descent's going to bring us in, the minimum descent altitudes are going to be honored, and we're going to touch down right at the runway elevation. And I'm basically going to fly this entire approach. I set to nice and cloudy and low visibility. We're not going to see the runway until we're right on top of it. I don't care. That makes it so easy. We're going to bring it all in. IFR, instrument approach. And there was a grand total of 1 button press involved. 1 button press involved. Once we've entered our destination and altitude, is 1 button press. Okay, so we just let you not have to watch over my shoulder for 2 minutes of flying. But look, all of a sudden the hoops head down. See? We're here at 20,000 feet, just like we dialed in, but the hoops are coming down. I did not have to enter anything to make that happen. That's just where Xavion quite easily computed. We need to start a 3-degree glide path to hit all our target altitudes for the instrument approach. Nothing was ever dialed in. I did not touch any buttons during the break here, okay? This is just where that descent point needs to be for a 3-degree descent all the way in with all the minimum descent altitudes being honored. So we're running along about 20,000 feet and we're about to hit that top of descent without a single button press. All right, so the hoops were set at 20,000 with a 3-degree glide path. There's no guarantee we're going to hit Wando at exactly 2,000, or in this case, Carno at 1,600. It's going to be at or above 1,600 while maintaining a 3-degree glide path in and the DME arc and all that good stuff. So basically, when you fly the real instrument approach right now, you're struggling saying, okay, well, what about my DME? What's my distance? How do I know what fix I'm at? That's the whole thing that makes instrument approaches hard. And probably the hardest thing you can do in non-military aviation without having an emergency. But with Xavion, it's just as simple as flying through the hoops. Okay, so now we're coming up on I-bane, and our minimum altitude is 1,600. We are comfortably above 1,600, but we're not above it due to some sort of a math error. We're above it because we can be and still have that 3-degree glide path. We only need to be at or above 1,600, and trust me, I'd rather be above it because altitude for me is less fuel burn and better gliding range. I want all the altitude I can get. I don't want to come in at the minimum. So many people, they fly all these approaches at the minimum altitudes. And the reason they do it is obvious. They can't plan. Since they can't plan, all they can do is just follow the rules. Well, let me be at the minimum altitude. That way I know I can get down to the runway. Because they don't have a better planning strategy. And what that means is they're dragging along at a higher fuel burn at a lower altitude with less gliding range, less safety, higher operating expense. But when you have an iPad app like this that keeps you as high as it can until intercepting a 3-degree glide path down the runway while honoring all the minimums to get to that point, you're always as high as you can be while having a perfectly safe, comfortable approach.
This is a green app as well.
Yeah, saves me a little bit of fuel, which is both dollars and carbon emissions. Okay, and now we're just basically following the hoops as we turn into final. So we're doing 175 knots here in a $3 million turboprop in actual instrument conditions with a DME arc and a continuous descent. It's a walk in the park. You just follow the hoops. Because I sat there and did all the trigonometry at home in my office for how to bring hoops down to a fixed point. And now that that work is all done by me, sitting there scratching my head and checking my work, for hours on end, it's just one button press and poof, the hoops are there. Whatever I can imagine.
A garnish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as far as FAA is concerned, it's like a garnish on the airplane. So a little thing that you can add, and it doesn't have to be certified because it's not physically installed in the airplane. The pilot brings it in with him, you see? And so it bypasses certification rules. And so we use it for situational awareness. But I can absolutely tell you that I get more information in a more user-friendly fashion this way. Okay, and there's the runway. So I'm sitting here having a conversation while flying an instrument approach at 160 knots. Nothing to it. Now, let's talk about the next thing, the missed approach. Of course, I could sit here and easily land, but I'm going to show you the missed approach. In the Garmin, you have to go fumble around, go down all these little menus, select, activate missed approach. You have to know whether to hit the enter button or push the rotator button. It's such a pain. I always have to do it wrong at least once before I do it right. And this is while I'm going forward in the airplane at 200 frickin' miles an hour. Here, do you see this little button? Does the camera see the button?
Well, I'm not zoomed in.
Zoom in. Simply hit the button. Miss. Boom. One button push. And now we got the missed approach. And so what does the missed approach do? The instructions for the missed approach are to fly a certain ways out, then hook a left turn, climb up to Wando, do a teardrop hold, is what you'd wind up doing, and enter a holding pattern. And that's what you'd have to actually do in your airplane to follow the rules. Very few people are going to be able to do that in a pinch. No problem. With me, one button press. Miss. And at that one button press, the hoops are presented. All I'm going to do now is fly through the hoops.
The proper missed
It
approach?
downloads all that from a Seattle avionics database. So every 30 days, Xavion grabs the latest data with all the FAA approved. And so this is all FAA approved data, by the way. I didn't make this stuff up. It grabs the FAA approved approach database from Seattle Avionics over Wi-Fi at home. That's done every 30 days. Then it has it, and then it does all the math and trigonometry and all that stuff to do the missed approaches.
So it needs
by
to
simply
be
following the hoops
periodically.
every 30 days.
Do you have anything? Let's say you've got a guy that puts it in his plane.
Okay.
And he just never takes it out. Do
Okay.
you have anything that says, hey man,
Oh,
you
of
need to go
course.
update?
Oh, of course. If you're late by if you're late by 1 day, it gives a little warning. If you're late by 30 days, it gives a bigger warning. If you're late by 60 days, it doesn't run. And I'm actually, now that you've asked me that, I'm going to go check. I'm going to check to make sure that really is the case, because nobody should be using data that's more than 60 days old.
But you don't want to have that kick in like in the middle of flight, though.
It happens when Xavion starts.
Okay.
That's a look at Xavion. Good for real pilots that don't want to get killed possibly, and for simulator pilots that want to see what it's like to fly a real airplane. And Xavion is $10 a month, so it's, shall we say, not exactly quite as expensive as other things in aviation, to say the least.
Question.
Okay, go.
Would you consider that making it free for people that only use it on the ground in the sim?
I used to do that, and then I quit. And here's why. Oh, this is so cool. I am involved in an electric vertical takeoff and landing airplane. Go to austinmeyer.com. I have my eVTOL airplane that I'm involved in. I got a picture or two of it at austinmeyer.com. And we have 250 test flights on this airplane, by the way. I'm taking a copy of Xavion and using it as the primary display for this airplane. I'm a partial company co-owner of this eVTOL company, and so we are literally using a copy of Xavion in the real airplane. As soon as I decided to use Xavion in the real airplane, I elected to always use an FAA certified database and never a simulator database. I didn't even want to have the code in there to handle a simulator database. Now when I'm writing, it's what literally will be certified for use in the airplane. Once I had to use current data, I had to get it from Seattle Avionics. Once I have to get it from Seattle Avionics, I have to pay them every 30 days. You see, I paid them for the data. So in other words, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Yeah, the data's not free. So Xavion is $10 a month. And even if I'm willing to work for free, and with Xavion I basically just about am, I still have to pay Seattle Avionics for that data. And that's definitely a per person month agreement that I have with Seattle Avionics. And as you can see, we're now starting to move on our final leg into the holding pattern. Of course, I'm doing a 90-degree bank, but it's easy enough to do a 90-degree bank when you can see everything that's going on and just follow the hoops. And then when I get to finally to the very end, the holding pattern, which is like a 50% opacity, will go blink and it'll go solid. And the hoops will go and run a little racetrack, and you can just run around the racetrack forever. Or until you decide whatever you're going to do next.
All right, I think that's it.
Okay. This is a pretty cool little Xavion workout.